Putin and the mentality of nuclear posturing. Russian President Vladimir Putin put the country's nuclear forces on high alert shortly after the West rebuked Russia for its 2022 invasion of Ukraine and imposed financial sanctions of unprecedented scope. Since then, the Kremlin has issued numerous additional nuclear threats, both overt and subtle. Worry is warranted because Putin has shown he is capable of carrying out his threats. Russia had already abandoned its no first use policy before the conflict in Ukraine broke out, which stated that it would never use nuclear weapons unless they were used first. Russia may have adopted a new strategy of escalate to de-escalate, which holds that showing one's commitment to destruction and forcing the enemy to capitulate through nuclear escalation can defuse a crisis. The CIA director and other high-ranking U.S. military leaders have warned that this could mean the use of a small number of tactical, low-yield nuclear weapons on the ground in Ukraine. When asked directly about the use of nuclear weapons, Putin has only said that Russia will do so in the face of an existential threat. However, Russian strategic doctrine does not provide a precise definition of what constitutes an existential threat. It's all in the eye of the beholder, or in this case, Putin, who allegedly must have Russia's defense minister and chief of the general staff of the armed forces authenticate his launch orders, but in reality retains full control of Russia's nuclear arsenal. In other words, the answer hinges on one of the most mysterious elements of the current crisis: Putin's mental health and worldview. The question of whether or not Putin is a rational actor has been at the center of the discussion surrounding his mental state. That debate is vital, but it has lacked nuance at times. A more rational strategy would be to consider how the Russian leader is affected by common psychological biases and pathologies, as identified through behavioral theory and research. Nobody knows how far Putin will go with his nuclear bluff. However, if Putin feels cornered, a confluence of known cognitive and psychological biases, as well as some psychological tendencies characteristic of Putin, could prove extraordinarily dangerous, with potentially massive implications as Ukraine launches its spring offensive. The Ukrainian conflict has been clouded by nuclear danger from the start. Conventional weapons have been used, but Putin would not have started this war without his nuclear deterrent. His strategy for achieving multiple war aims has included repeated attempts at nuclear coercion, with decidedly mixed results. Putin has threatened nuclear war, for example, to prevent NATO from sending ground troops to the conflict zone. Without a doubt, this has been successful, and it sends a chilling message to other countries, nuclear and otherwise, about the scope for aggression below the nuclear threshold. Putin hoped that by making threats, he could limit or prevent the West from sending military aid to Ukraine. Concerns about a nuclear escalation appear to be a limiting factor in the amount of aid given. Russia's coercive efforts on this front, however, are losing their previous effectiveness. Slowly but surely, a coalition of supporters has increased their aid to Ukraine, risking nuclear escalation in the process. The most recent development is a joint allied program to train Ukrainian pilots on F-16 fighter jets. This could pave the way for a transfer of these highly sought-after fighter aircraft in the future. Putin's threats have done nothing to stop NATO's growth. Already, Finland has abandoned its long-held neutrality and joined the alliance, extending NATO's border with Russia by another 800 kilometers. Sweden is ready to join the EU as soon as Turkey gives its blessing. Putin's ultimate goal, and arguably the most important factor, is to have Ukraine capitulate. The president of Russia may be tempted to take more overt nuclear brinksmanship to achieve this end. Even though the war is going badly for him, he will still need nuclear weapons to carry out his plans. Putin would have to weigh the costs and benefits of using nuclear weapons, and those trade-offs would be difficult. Even if he believes that using nuclear weapons will speed up the end of a long and difficult war, he must weigh the potential short-term benefits against the certain long-term harms. There will be irreparable damage done to the survivors, the environment, the norms of domestic and international politics, and the very integrity of human civilization if the Biden administration and its allies follow through with their threats of destruction, loss of life, and punishing retaliatory strikes beyond Ukraine's borders. Given sufficient time and consideration, This equation should not lead to a nuclear arms race. The problem, as shown by both psychological research and historical evidence, is that humans have a hard time weighing contradictory risks and benefits, even when those risks and benefits are associated with nuclear weapons. When we're confronted with a lot of options, we tend to pare things down until one stands out as the best. Instead of trying to devise some kind of universal measuring stick by which to fairly compare and contrast competing values and goals, we simply rank them in order of importance and work toward achieving the most important one first. When our values clash, as noted by Kenneth Hammond and Gerald Mumpower, we tend to singular emphasis on our favorite value. The prominence effect describes this process of selective attention. The prominence effect is like a spotlight that shines on the most salient features of a decision, elevating them to the forefront of our minds and making the seemingly difficult choice seem simple. This provides a rationale for the existence of single-issue voters in politics, who base their votes solely on the candidate's stance on a single issue like gun control, abortion, or immigration. Humanitarian values like protecting human lives and the environment may be sacrificed in favor of more immediate and defensible security goals or more salient personal goals due to the prominence effect. For example, in times of crisis, it is common for voters to focus solely on one issue related to national security. Leaders must balance the short-term military and political benefits of developing and using nuclear weapons with the far-reaching, but difficult to assess human, social, cultural, and political consequences. As a result, the threshold for escalating conflict when under threat or in the face of losses may be lowered, as long-term consequences, no matter how great their intrinsic importance, may be pushed outside of the spotlight. Our inability to accurately quantify the suffering of the many is another cognitive bias that tips the scales. Many are familiar with the adage, the death of one man is a tragedy, the death of a million is a statistic, though they may not know that it is often attributed to the mass-murdering Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. This aphorism, like others of its ilk, such as, statistics are human beings with the tears dried off, accurately captures the fallibility of our attempts to quantify empathy. As a society, we grieve over the deaths of individuals but are numb to the suffering of large populations. One term for this is psychic numbing. Some people will risk their lives to save a total stranger because they know how much value a single life has. Appreciating the humanity of a group or population is much more difficult. Numerous experiments on life-saving behavior have shown that our intuitive feelings, which we trust to guide us in making all sorts of decisions, do not scale up, revealing a flaw in our humanitarian accounting. Psychic numbing causes us to become less affected by tragedies as the number of lives in danger rises. The more people who die, the less we care in some cases. If the numbers are high enough, our capacity for empathy may be overwhelmed. More people cared about the tragic death of 2-year-old Syrian refugee Aylan Kurdi, whose body washed up on a beach in Turkey in 2015, than they did about the hundreds of thousands of people who had died in the Syrian civil war up to that point, as evidenced by statistics. Growing body counts don't always increase our sense of horror or our sense of outrage at those responsible for war and genocide. The prospect of millions of deaths may not sway a leader who is willing to consider nuclear war. It's possible that these statistics cease to influence choice after crossing a certain sensitivity threshold regarding individual suffering. Putin's decision-making may be influenced by broader psychological dynamics, as suggested by studies of the prominence effect and psychic numbing. However, what do psychologists know about how people feel about nuclear weapons in general? It is understandably challenging to collect empirical evidence on this question. The level of public approval for nuclear weapons use in the United States has been the subject of numerous surveys. However, the real-world trade-offs that a leader may face are rarely considered in these polls. For example, a leader may have to decide whether to risk the lives of U.S. soldiers or launch a nuclear strike that will kill a large number of foreign noncombatants. U.S. President Harry Truman faced this very conundrum when he decided to use nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. It is in situations like these, where there is no good option, that the prominence effect and psychic numbing can really take off.